Petrol price relief could be short-lived and motorists could be paying almost R1 more for fuel. The price of petrol might go up by 90 cents. That's according to the Automobile Association. While the opposition to urban tolling alliance's outstanding legal fees could scupper ARTA's case against e-tolls, we're joined now by Paul Browning, who's managing consultant from Lesiba Modal Transport Consulting on the line, and then Wayne Duvenage of ARTA to look at the road users and the pressure that they're going to be under, not only when the tolls take effect, but when the petrol price increase comes into being as well. Paul, let's perhaps start off with you on the line. We're looking at this petrol price potentially breaching that 13 Rand to the litre mark yet again. So talk us through what exactly is happening here. Is it all as a result of the weakness of the Rand that we're seeing filter through?
Yes, it is pretty much. The oil price has been fairly stable over the last few weeks at the very least. And so the fear is that the depreciation of the Rand is going to have a big effect. It was early this morning at around 10. It slipped a little bit now, but it's hovering around that kind of mark. And as the AA has said, this will imply an increase of very close to R1 a litre at the beginning of July. That's a heck of an amount.
It's a heck of an amount, and of course we can't control the Rand. I suppose if you look at long-term policies from the South African government and other institutions, you can say that they are influencing the weakness in the Rand because the international community doesn't like us, Paul. But let's forget that. The Rand is going down, the oil price is holding steady above $100 a barrel, and it's a serious rise. R1 a litre is an enormous amount. How impactful will this be on the transport industry? On the transport industry, it will be significant because, of course, the transport industry, both freight and passenger, uses diesel, but the diesel price rises pretty well. Although it's not regulated, it rises pretty well in line with the petrol price, and for the same reasons. So it will have a huge impact. One of the factors that we often discuss is the lack of adequate alternatives for either passenger or freight. I stay in Gauteng, and it's not easy to get around Gauteng by public transport. And similarly, although there are big plans for Transnet to improve its freight facilities, it really hasn't happened yet. So all the increase is simply going to have to be absorbed by the operating companies and in turn, of course, passed on to the consumer.
Wayne, that's exactly why bringing on e-tolling at this point is such a contentious issue in the first place. Yes, there's the cost to consider for the consumer, but also because of the lack of alternative for the consumer and the motorist in the first place.
Precisely. The one thing about this project is that there were no alternatives. There still aren't alternatives, not only in transport, public transport, but in alternative routes. And so the road user becomes captive to these freeways, which are no longer free. And they're going to be told, and there are a lot of people that just cannot afford this, that are really living on the breadline. To throw another 300-400 Rand into their budget a month is wrong, and fundamentally wrong, because this is social infrastructure that is required to get people to work so that they can earn salaries and pay taxes. And it is really a very ludicrous decision that has been made here.
Wayne, human beings are very resilient creatures, and have you had a look at the long term and said to yourself, right, e-tolling is going to happen, presumably it will happen, the Rand price of petrol is going to go up given the current trends we're seeing in economic markets, but people find a way, don't they? Do you see any change in, for example, traffic patterns, the way people work? I mean, I think it's a great social experiment in a rather perverse way.
Yeah, well, it takes a long time. It's very costly for people to move closer to their work, so that's not going to happen very quickly. And we're not like other cities where tolling does work because they have great infrastructure, great transport systems. We have a very different spatial city spread, and it's going to be a problem for society. So no, I don't see the fact that people can really change their travel patterns, certainly not through peak hours. I mean, there'll be absolute gridlock in the routes around the freeways. So that's not going to happen. People are going to be forced on the freeways, which is why this is not going to be supported by society. And we're seeing for the first time a huge uprise. And you know, the fact that tolling might happen, might be forced, into place. But it could, and we surmise it's going to very quickly collapse, because people are not going to come to the party, they're not going to get the tags. That is the message that's going out there. And by the way, we might very well win this case, and it's an extremely strong case, in which case it will be outlawed, it will be illegal to toll in the Supreme Court later on this year.
Paul, let's get your view on e-tolling specifically, because for Lindsay, as he says, it's a great social experiment. It's a great social experiment for those living in Cape Town, not necessarily for those in Gauteng.
A social experiment, yes, well, that's true. I think that I'd rather perhaps comment that Sanral is going to find it extremely difficult to move as quickly as it would have liked in implementing e-tolls. It's put out regulations for public comment, and the period ends on the 23rd of June. And they had said that within 14 days of that, they will be ready to implement e-tolls. Now, if the petrol price goes up by a rand at just about the same time, it might be a very politically sensitive issue.
Paul, I sensed a bit of Cape Town envy there from Alicia, but that need not detain us. Let's talk a little bit about the implications for the price of goods at, for example, a supermarket. Let's say that an item costs 10 rand. How much of that 10 rand is actually transport costs? And transport costs is, of course, the cost of the truck, the cost of the driver, the cost of presumably e-tolling, and of course petrol. Is it a significant amount?
It is a significant amount, and obviously it varies with the product. You hadn't mentioned, by the way, the cost of taking raw materials to wherever it's going to be processed and so on. Yes, transport, it would be silly of me to give any kind of figure, because it would depend on the product, but it is a significant amount. If you go into the supermarket, yes, you're paying a good deal for the freight that got it there.
Have you been able, Wayne, to get any sense of the quantum of cost, or exactly how much this is going to cost?
No, what, the fuel levy is, or tolling, or combined? No, we leave that to the transport economists. But as Paul says, it is going to be exorbitant, certainly on the fuel price and tolling. And there's this notion, well, a fuel levy, do we fund infrastructure through fuel levy and taxation as opposed to tolling? Which one's the higher impact? We do know that a lot of the transportation of goods to and from markets operates through the Gauteng corridors, and tolling is going to have a huge impact on the costs of transportation.
It also puts into the spotlight the
Wayne, just very, very finally, just 30 seconds. Is it possible that, I was glibly talking about social experiments, but is it possible that this sort of event, i.e. e-tolling, and also the exorbitant price of petrol, will actually encourage the government in the long term to create better public transport systems, and therefore we'll look back and say this was the catalyst and this was actually a good thing?
Well, certainly it was supposed to be part of the process some years ago, and when you look at the documentation surrounding the e-toll plan, public transport, park and ride nodes were supposed to be put in and funded through this, and that was all taken out. It was all going straight into the project itself. There has now been a huge drive by the local authorities here in Gauteng to put an integrated public transport and transport mechanisms in place, and they reckon over the next 3 years that that's going to take place. So I think this has been a catalyst for that, because you're quite right. Without alternatives, tolling on and keeping people captive on tolled roads is very wrong, and that's what's going to, I think, drive the social experiment in the wrong direction for government.